We see in the middle of our mind a little ball of golden light, and we watch this light as it begins to grow, larger and larger, until now it covers the entire inner vision of our mind. We see for ourselves within this light a beautiful temple, and we see a garden that surrounds the temple and a body of water that flows through the garden. We see that the inside of the temple is lit as well by this same beautiful golden light. And here we are, for we have been drawn together by the power and in the presence of God. We devote ourselves and all of our relationships and experiences together to Him. And we pray that His most Holy Spirit be upon us, lifting us up above and beyond the fears, the limitations, and the sorrows of this world, to the love and to the peace that lay beyond. And so it is. Together we all say, Amen. Well, after the somewhat horrible events of the last few weeks, particularly with all of the tensions roiling in the United States around Baton Rouge and Minnesota and Dallas, all of that entire context and gestalt, our politicians have been very big on telling us that we need to have love and compassion. All of them, really. You know, Trump said we need compassion, and Hillary said we need love and empathy, and Obama said we need love and empathy. And I think that it's reasonable for us to ask, where was all that love and empathy when they were making the domestic and foreign policies that in many cases contributed to these things? Where was all that love and empathy when we made some of our criminal justice laws, 3 strikes, you're out, and so forth? Where was all that love and compassion and empathy when we plan our national budget? You know, the United States gives 0.6 of 1% away in humanitarian aid. That's a tiny portion of what other advanced democracies give. Where's our love and compassion and empathy for other species, not to mention our own, when we make so many of our environmental policies? You know, there's a line in the Bible that the Course in Miracles explains beautifully, and that line is, God shall not be mocked. The Course in Miracles says what that means is, oh, He isn't. What that means is, you will reap what you sow. You will get what you put out. Now, what we tend to do, and we do this in our own lives, I've done it in mine, gosh knows, we all know this. It's like you act in a way, you think in a way, and you act in a way that is not in alignment with the truth of who you are. It is not in alignment with the love within you. And then what happens? You crash into a wall. The effects of the cause, which was your behavior, come at you, and then you fall to your knees. Oh God, I'm so sorry. And I atone for my error, and I forgive other people for theirs, and please lift me up out of all this terrible stuff. And you know, there's a line in the New Testament where Jesus says, go and sin no more. So He says, I'm healing you, but go and sin no more. What does that mean? It means if you go back to the thinking that produced this diseased condition, the symptom will return. God Himself will not violate the law of cause and effect. The Course in Miracles says, first of all, that God's laws are changeless, and secondly, the law of cause and effect, like all spiritual laws, are there for your protection. So you can't behave lovelessly, whether you're an individual or a nation. And then when it all comes back to you, the effect being exactly what you might have thought the cause would create if you had any spiritual intelligence applied to this at all, and then you go, oh Lord, comfort me. God shall not be mocked. And so weeks like this, you know, people in my field are real popular now. Everybody wants to talk to us. Everybody wants to hear from us now. Comfort us. But once we get back up off our knees, and I've done it, I've talked about it in books, you get back on, you get back up because you feel this miracle in your life, then you go back to acting the same way you were acting before, then you crash and burn, then you're down on your knees, I'm so sorry, God lift me up, God lifts you up, then you go right back to living the way you were before, then you crash and burn, you go back to your knees, oh my God, please lift me up, I atone, I forget, please lift me up, God lifts you up. And I finally in my own life, I remember the time I said to myself, next time you're on your knees, just stay there. And that's the problem with this country, and that's the problem with this species, and it's the problem with each and every one of us. I call it the place where I have my limits. You know, the Course in Miracles says, your problem is not that you do not believe in love. Your problem is that you do not believe in love only. You know, that place where all of us go, okay, I was loving, but I have my limits. Can you imagine Jesus going, I have my limits? Can you imagine Buddha going, I have my limits? Love is only real when it is limitless. And part of love being limitless means that we don't just go to it when we're hurting. We don't just go to it after the tragedy. We don't just go to it for comfort when we ourselves created the situations that cause us pain. You know, we've been talking about this quite a lot because in my book I talk about how to get out of these situations that cause us pain. And the three lights that I talk about are Buddha and Moses and Jesus. Now in all of those systems, but in all of the great religious and spiritual systems, there are only three that I know enough about that I can legitimately write about them. But in all of them, I know enough to know that these are universal spiritual themes. When Buddha realized that life was suffering, and that began his spiritual journey from suffering that then culminated in his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree and his reaching that enlightened state, the consciousness of nirvana. And the journey that the Israelites took from being slaves in Egypt, being delivered from the slavery, and then the 40 years journey through the desert that ultimately culminated in the entrance into the Promised Land. And Jesus' suffering on the cross that then culminated 3 days later in resurrection. Now, if you look at Buddha's journey to enlightenment, and if you look at Moses and the Israelites' journey to the Promised Land, and you look at the journey of Jesus, it wasn't as though God didn't say what he wanted. God is not just there to comfort us when we have messed up. The laws of God are the principles of alignment by which, should we live them, we won't mess up. And they're eternal. They've been spoken for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. But when I was writing what I was so amazed by, reading Buddha's Noble Truths and reading the Eightfold Path and reading again, interestingly enough, the 10 Commandments, not to mention the things we talk about all the time about forgiveness, about unconditional love, is how startlingly contemporary they are. How startling is the contemporary relevance. We pretend they're irrelevant because we don't want to look at them. And so it's so amazing how the ego is. You know, the ego just loves to talk about God after it's already messed up your life. Go to God for comfort. But the ego doesn't want us to talk about going to God when we make every decision when things are fine. And so the United States, for instance, has its limits. We're really good at praying together, reminding each other we're all brothers and sisters. We're all in this together after the tragedies have occurred. But when we're making domestic policies, when we're making foreign policies, oh, you know, Spirituality is just kind of peripheralized, it's kind of trivialized. Once again, all that a nation is a collection of individuals. It's not like a nation does this, but we individually don't do it, all of us do. This isn't about pointing fingers, this isn't about assigning blame, but it is about bearing witness to what's happening in ourselves and in our country. You know, one of the things about a free society is that the government is, whether we like it or not, as long as democracy is even partially working, a reflection of our consciousness. And so the issue is not just for us to know things, but to stand on what we know. Too many times we know that love should happen, but we're not willing to say so. We're not willing to take a stand. And there are times in life when it's not enough to just know it. Where were you when we invaded Iraq? Or where were you when the 3 strikes you're out laws and certain issues of criminal justice and certain issues of this? So much is happening right now could have been predicted with any modicum of intelligence. You know, I wrote a book in 1998 called Healing the Soul of America. And you look at that book right now, and it's not like I'm smart or anything, I just am, as a student of these things, you know, during the 1990s, everybody was going around saying everything's so good. Everything's so good. But a metaphysician is trained. That's what happens when you're a student of the Course in Miracles or any serious spiritual path. You are trained as a metaphysician, greater than the physical. So we talk about this all the time. That's what forgiveness is, that you extend your perceptions beyond just what the physical senses can see. You extend it, and then you get into the level of cause, and then you understand the effects that are coming. So I remember in the 1990s, everybody was talking about how good everything was. And I wrote in that book, I said, well, doesn't that kind of depend on what neighborhood you live in? Doesn't that sort of depend on what corner of the world you live in? Yeah, it looks like everything's good, but it's like Martin Luther King used to talk about positive peace and negative peace. He said, negative peace is where there's no outright conflict, but there's underlying tension and anxiety. Positive peace can only be based on justice and brotherhood. So it's not like everything that's been happening now. It's like never happened before. It has roiled up to the surface. But if we were looking through metaphysical eyes, we could see this was bound to get this bad. Because there was so much injustice at the core. There was so much oppression at the core. And until we proactively decide to be healthy, we will be sick. Now that's what happened like when the AIDS crisis emerged. The AIDS crisis had a lot of effects, some of them positive on this country. Because you know, it's like it talks in the Bible about how what man intends for evil, God intends for good. Even things that are horrible through the grace of God can have effects when they are encountered with love that are ultimately positive. And the AIDS crisis in the United States had a lot to do with a shift in mainstream thinking about health in general. We moved, largely because of that crisis, away from the solely allopathic medical paradigm to a more integrative approach. Now, before that integrative holistic model began to be part of our mainstream understanding, we didn't really think you had to necessarily take care of your body through nutrition or through exercise or anything like that. You just hoped you didn't get sick. And then if you did get sick, you hoped that a doctor could give you a remedy, allopathic remedy, that would suppress or eradicate the symptoms. Now, we evolved past that paradigm. We evolved into the recognition that you need to take care of your body so you don't get sick. You have to proactively cultivate health. You can't just wait till you get sick. Health is not the absence of sickness. Sickness is the absence of health. And now we're beginning to realize that about happiness and sadness. We're beginning to realize that about a peaceful world versus a violent world. Happiness is not the absence of depression. Depression is the absence of happiness. Peace on earth is not the absence of conflict. Conflict is the absence of peace. But when people say, well, you can't just think happy thoughts, let's be clear about what happy thoughts are. And when people say you can't just think peace, let's think about what it means to say we think peace. Where there is injustice, there will not be peace. Where there is oppression, there will not be peace. When we are not thinking and behaving according to eternal spiritual laws, which are the laws that prevail within what the Course in Miracles calls the celestial order, or the ultimately moral universe, then we are, through the power of our thoughts, casting ourselves out into the outer kingdoms of randomness and chaos. 'Twas always thus, and shall always be. This isn't going to change. The only question is, will we? So I want to talk a little bit about Buddha and about the Ten Commandments. We think, oh, that's just, over there somewhere. It's not just over there somewhere, it's right in here. And it is right in here. We tend to, ever since, and this started with this vast over-secularization of Western mind, really started with the advent of the Industrial Revolution toward the end of the 1800s in Britain. And it's not like the Industrial Revolution has not brought about some wonderful things, because it has. And technology and medicine and all kinds of wonderful things have happened since the advent of the Industrial Revolution through the 20th century and so forth. But towards the beginning, the very end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 1900s, everybody thought, oh, this is going to solve all humanity's problems. And what we know now, of course, is that technology and a mechanistic and rationalistic view of the world has not solved all of humanity's problems. In many cases, it has helped solve problems. In other cases, it has totally exacerbated and even created problems. And that is because, as the Course in Miracles teaches us, the material world is of itself neutral. Any power of the world is holy or unholy as determined by the mind, the purpose that the mind ascribes to whatever that is. So, as it turns out, all this totally spiritual, religious stuff matters after all, doesn't it? But once again, if you just come to the great spiritual teachings for comfort when you have messed up, the great spiritual teachings in their way are fierce. And so I'd like to read to you just a little bit. But Buddha's four noble truths, and we've talked about that some recently, and we're not going to stay with this tonight, but you'll see the relevance here. He says, number one, things of this world can provide only temporary happiness at best. Now, we've talked about that before tonight in other contexts about how everybody's on the make, everybody's trying to grasp for that thing that will make us happy. If we get this, if we achieve that, it'll make us happy. But then it being a thing outside ourselves, the job, the money, the house, the sex, whatever it is. Once we get there, half the time we're on the make, grasping, trying to make it happen, because we can't be happy until we get it. Then we get it, and then for about 10 minutes we're happy. And then, as Buddha said, the fairy dust will rub off, and then we're in despair because it didn't make us happy even when we got it. And then the same thought system that says that would provide you happiness to begin with, when you go back to it and say, well, now I'm in despair even though I got it, it says, oh, you need more of it, you see. Topics for other nights. Number two, suffering is caused by our attachment to the things of this world. Number three, we can be liberated from our attachments to the things of this world and thus freed from our suffering. And four, through the Eightfold Path or middle way, choosing neither extreme luxury nor extreme self-denial, we can be free of suffering. Now, the Eightfold Path are these: right understanding, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Now, I want to take two of these and talk about them in terms of where our country is today. Right action and right livelihood. How are we doing? How are we doing? How are we doing? So if right action, I remember there was an ashram, and this ashram had a guru, a spiritual teacher, and everything blew up because the spiritual teacher, as it turned out, was having all kinds of sexual liaisons with the young women who were coming to the ashram for his spiritual counsel. And it all blew up. It was a huge scandal. This man had to leave town, and I think it was Matthew Fox, the American spiritual teacher, who was brought to the ashram to help them process through what had occurred. And one of the people who were in the audience working on this and talking about this said about the spiritual teacher who had to leave town because he had had sex with so many of the women there, well, he did the best he could. He did the best he knew how. To which Matthew Fox responded, no, he didn't. No, he didn't. No, he didn't. So if we're going to look at our own right action as a country, it can be very difficult. We always say here, if you're going to a therapist and all they do is talk about what you're doing right, you're probably the wrong therapist. The same is also true if that therapist only wants to talk about what you're doing wrong. You're probably the wrong therapist, and that's what friends are for, to hold that juxtaposition. That's what personal growth work is. You want to give yourself credit where credit is due and look at your shadows too, because both are important. Now, when it comes to the United States, people tend to be in two different categories. And one category is we only do right things, and if you even talk about anything that we do wrong, then you're one of those blame America people. You're a negativizer, which is ridiculous about a country just as it's ridiculous about an individual. Just like they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, you need to take a fearless moral inventory. You must be brutally honest with yourself. Because if you don't look at your shadows, you don't bring them up for review, as it says in A Course in Miracles, Spirit says, I cannot take from you what you will not release to me. We heal through a kind of detox. You can't pour the light over the darkness, the Course says. You must bring the darkness to the light. And so this is as true of a country as it is true of a person. So, some people say we've done everything right and you're only a blame America person if you look at what's wrong. But then on the other hand, there are people who say we only did everything wrong and will never give America credit for anything. And they are equally inaccurate in their understanding of who we are. Now, if you look at that then, and you ask about right action, and you ask about right livelihood, it behooves us as citizens to ask ourselves, how are we doing? Are we kidding ourselves? And how are we doing in the right livelihood department? Right livelihood means you're not supposed to do anything to make a living that would cause harm to people or animals. How are we doing, everybody? Now, I don't say this as someone who myself can look at every little thing. I look at this stuff and I do a lot of oops. But that's how we grow. We grow through the oops. And when it comes to our collective behavior, the woman I know, I had one friend who died in 9/11. She was probably, number one, one of the most apolitical people I've ever known. But she was also one of the kindest people I've ever known. If you had asked me, list on your hand, 5 people who would be the first to cry if they saw a movie or a television show about unnecessary cruelty, and the cruelty is always unnecessary, she would be on that list. But she was on that plane. So we're at a time, ladies and gentlemen, where karma is collective. So if it's a public issue, it's coming to your private door. The great karmic issues at this point are collective. And because some of the consequences of our collective unwise decisions are coming back at us collectively, where do you think you're going to escape? And so an issue like how are we doing in the right action department? How are we doing in the right livelihood department? Now on the issue of the 10 Commandments, this gets to you even more. Because what God said to the Israelites was, I'm going to make you my chosen people. And the Course in Miracles says, everyone is called, but few are chosen. No, many are called, but few are chosen, means everyone is called, but few care to listen. There was a covenant. There were the Israelites listening to God and God speaking. And God says, there are some things that I want. And when you look at the 10 Commandments, they are so amazingly modern. Number 1, I am the Lord thy God. You shall have no other gods before me. Now think about what God is to you. And one thing that God is to most of us is love. As a nation, how are we doing? When you look at our domestic policies and when we look at our foreign policies, do we put love first? Or do we not have a God before me? Which, of course, is money. Put no gods before me means put no gods before me, or things aren't going to ultimately work out for you. Not because God is punishing. We punished ourselves. God just creates the law, cause and effect. If we violate the law, that doesn't mean God will then punish us. No, we are punishing ourselves. And the Course in Miracles says it will seem to take time before you experience the effect. But time itself is just a learning system. It actually happens right then. So if you say to the United States, love the Lord thy God, put no gods before me, and if the collective behavior of the United States is in our domestic and international policies, how are we doing? Do we put love first? When we make our budget, do we put love first? When we do our educational policies, do we put love first? When we make our environmental policies, do we put love first? When we make our policies about anything, our business policies, do we put love first? The Course in Miracles would sort of, the attitude would be just a question. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. Now, in the Jewish religion, you shall not make a carved image. It's actually there's this amazing aesthetic that has to do with no carved images of God, which is fascinating. But the metaphysics of it has to do with not bowing down to anything but God. And God is love. It is not of form. Do not make yourself a graven image. The material world, we are mesmerized by the material world. And when Buddha said, nothing of the material world will bring you but temporary happiness, this idea that if you look to the outer world for the source of your happiness, and then it won't quite do that, and when I said the fairy dust will rub off, that's the same thing as saying you made a false image. You made an idol, and then the idol fell. So in terms of our national consciousness, with just these two, how are we doing? In other words, ladies and gentlemen, everything that's happening on the planet right now, everything that's happening in the country right now, is just like what happens when our own personal lives fall apart. There's a message here. Something's got to change. And if you don't change on the level of cause, then no matter what you do to move through this, the same kinds, all that will happen is that the symptoms will morph, but the dis-ease will be back. Number 3. You shall not take the name the Lord your God in vain. Well, you know, it doesn't matter what the name is, but we do not have an appreciation for love. We do not have an appreciation for holiness. We trivialize it. We act like it doesn't matter. We talk in ways. You know, one of the issues of right living, when we were talking about Buddhism, right livelihood and right speech. Every thought, the Course in Miracles says, creates form on some level. Look at the internet itself. Look at all the hate vibrations that get put into the world. I mean, we are really good at it. And every thought creates form on some level. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Well, you know, this is another one. We act like it's kind of quaint, don't we? Let's talk about what Sabbath means. And it doesn't matter whether it's with the Jewish religion, your Sabbath, and I think Islam also, the Sabbath is on Saturday, isn't it? Or Christianity, where the Sabbath is on Sunday. But let's look at the contemporary psychology of a Sabbath. I talked once before about how I was visiting Florida once, and I was visiting with an Orthodox Jewish family. And they really keep the Sabbath, man. That means like at sundown on Friday, that's it. No phone used, except if there is someone who needs to be picked up for Sabbath dinner. The car wouldn't be used unless somebody was being picked up for Sabbath dinner. And this was a very contemporary family. Lots of teenagers, lots of kids, grandparents, but it was a very wired household. I mean, very contemporary, very modern, lots of computers, lots of TVs, lots of screens. Very, you know, modern people. And I thought, wow, I wonder what this is going to be like. And actually, I was wondering what's going to be like for me. I don't know if I can do that. And what I discovered experiencing this was that these kids didn't complain because it had been this way from the time they were born. They had never known anything else. And sure enough, by sundown, everything was off. was like there had been like a storm in the neighborhood or something like that. No electronics on. Nothing except that which is natural. And what followed was such a blessing for me to be able to experience. Guess what? They talked to each other. The teenagers were talking to their grandparents, and grandparents and teenagers were talking to little kids. And they spent that one day a week recalibrating all the relationship vectors, recalibrating all of the trajectories of relationship and experience within the household. You could just kind of feel it. Everything was reset. But today we make mistakes. We make mistakes individually and we make mistakes collectively because we're all going too fast. We're all too stressed. We have no impulse control. And then even when you see things that are happening in your name, even when you see political things, social things, economic things that are happening, that your own government is perpetrating, even if you see it, you're too exhausted to take part. It's like that's part of the ecosystem. And that's one of the reasons why financial inequality, economic inequality matters. Because people who are financially stressed don't have the time or energy to do what they need to do in order to be good parents, good citizens, and so forth. That's part of the game, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you disempower people. Make sure they're in survival mode all the time. And so a Sabbath is so extremely important. And we can't, change all this on some collective level, nor would we want to. We would never want to legislate something like that. But it's the kind of thing which they do in some countries. We would not want that in our country. But we, in our own individual lives, can see the ways that we ourselves are out of alignment with the moral order of the universe. That's what a Sabbath does. It recalibrates and realigns even our nervous systems. It's like when you go ballroom dancing. I remember when I first took a ballroom dancing class, I thought, now I understand why when I was growing up, so many of my friends' parents went ballroom dancing once a week. It like realigns the bodies to each other. It's an amazing thing. Nature has a way of doing that. But we have to have enough honor and respect for the laws of nature. Otherwise, we're all spun out, we're all crazy, we're all like, blah, and we're acting in crazy spun out ways. So then we shouldn't be too surprised when our own government is acting in crazy spun out ways, and crazy spun out things are happening, and we say this is crazy. But all of that was a product of the fact that we ourselves were not taking responsibility for the changes that need to happen. I just want to go through the rest of these. Honor your father and your mother. So thousands of years ago, when Moses is going through the desert and he goes up to Mount Sinai, he gets back, honor thy father and your mother, and we think we're so modern and we're so cool and we're so wise because we have discovered that if you don't get clear with your parents, forget having good relationships for the rest of your life. This is not new. This is not new. If your parents were good, honor them more, and if they weren't so good, you're going to have to forgive them in order to ever have decent relationships with men or women throughout your life. It was said already. You shall not murder. How are we doing? This is one of those I have my limits. This is one of those where we make it very selective. If somebody does it to us, we call it murder. If we do it to us and it's a whole bunch of people at a time, we call it a military action, and oops, if it didn't work out. You shall not commit adultery. There's a lot of suffering that goes on because we're not exactly cool with our sexual energy. It's very difficult to have your sexual energy all out of whack. Kind of like, not that we don't all, trying to excuse myself on this one, but most of us in our path have at some point or another learned this one the hard way, perhaps. But it's a very, very powerful energy. And when we have no respect, when we see everything, it's like a moral order falls apart. When we act like it doesn't matter. But it does matter. People get hurt when we don't have respect for the agreements between two people that have to do with sexual energy. These are just all the ways we just have let ourselves as a nation, this doesn't matter so much, that doesn't matter so much. You shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, and you shall not covet. How's our country doing on the you shall not steal part? Did it work out for us when we overthrew the democratically elected leader of Iran by any chance? And then put the Shah in his place, and of course the Shah was then replaced by the Ayatollah, and we know how that's worked out. And why did we do that? We did that because the democratically elected leader of Iran actually had the audacity to believe the oil should belong to the Iranians. Can you imagine? Not to British Petroleum, but to the Iranians and the United States and Britain, and so we weren't going to have any of that. How has that worked out for us? Thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not steal. Have you read anything about American policy in small South American nations, etc., people like John Perkins? It's like we all kind of know this, but we look away. So everything that's happening with racial justice, everything that's happening with our criminal justice system, everything that's happening with the wars now being perpetrated, all the international terrorism, it's not enough to look at the invasion of a country that did not do anything to you. It's not enough to have so easily acquiesced to a situation of fire raining down on men, women, and children who did nothing to you, whose government, even if they had weapons of mass destruction, we do business every day with countries that have weapons of mass destruction. Even if their leaders had killed some of their people, we do business every day with people who've killed their own people. What do you think China's done in Tibet? And from a spiritual perspective, it's not enough to say, well, the government did it if we ourselves did not speak up. Martin Luther King says, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter. Now, the good news. What's the good news, in case I've really totally depressed you? The Course in Miracles says you pay a very heavy price for not taking full responsibility for your life experience. And that price we pay is that we cannot change it. And so for us to atone, for us to open our eyes, for us to see the game for what it is, for us to know that now all the politicians are talking about love and empathy and compassion. Actually, George Bush said, I thought, something very wise the other day in Dallas when he said, we tend to judge people by their worst examples and judge ourselves by our best intentions. That's really profound. That was very judgmental of me just now, that tone in my voice, so I apologize for that. Nothing's going to change until we change on the level of cause. Nothing's going to change until we change on the level of cause. As long as we, the Course in Miracles has a line which is very profound. It says, some people would rather die than change their minds. And that's how we're acting. We'll do anything, but don't ask us to change the bottom line of the way we live our lives or anything. And until we make that stand, and if we don't do it, who do we think is going to do it? So it begins inside us, where we ask ourselves, where do we say, I have my limits? Where do we say, well, this part of my life is about love, and that part of my life is about love, but this part of my life isn't about love? God can have this, God can have that, but this, I have my limits. Or this, I have to have my conditions. It's not that we're not to hold people accountable. It's not that we're not to, quote unquote, set boundaries. Setting boundaries and holding people accountable has nothing to do with withholding love. And so we are living as a species. When you look at the way we treat each other, when you look at the way we treat the earth, when you look at the way as a nation we work with other countries, nothing that is happening today should surprise us. And when I wrote Healing the Soul of America, and I talked about, well, doesn't it depend on what neighborhood you're living in, whether or not things are so good, because you could feel it broiling up from the bottom of things. There was so much injustice already, but see, this is the way the American ego works, because we have an individual ego, and then we have a collective ego. And the collective ego is this. We like to think of ourselves as good people, because deep down we want to be good people. So what we've been doing for decades now
is, and there's no one to blame. It's viral thinking. It's not like individuals we could blame. It's not like that. It's thinking. But we have to be alert to the thinking in order for our own thinking to change and be part of the change. So what the American ego does, we want to be decent people. We want to be good people. We don't want to think anybody suffers as a consequence of policies that we in some way participate in. So what's been happening for decades, ladies and gentlemen, is that you and I have been given what we think we want in terms of access to a certain lifestyle, etc., and any suffering that resulted from any imbalances or inequities that resulted from that was either kept on the other side of town where you wouldn't see it, or the other side of the world so you wouldn't see it. Because as long as we didn't see it, we could think that basically everything was okay and we were decent people and we weren't doing anything terribly wrong. And then when horrible things happen because we didn't see it on the level of cause, we act like we don't know where any of it came from. Grown-ups don't do that. Grown-ups, when we are suffering, when we are unhappy, our first question is, what was my part in this? That's the first question for us to ask ourselves when our own lives aren't working. It might have been 90% somebody else's fault, but what was our part? So until we as individuals, that's what happens ultimately in your own individual life when things aren't working right. Sometimes people say, well, give me the principle to apply to this situation. Give me a spiritual principle that I can apply to this situation. Spirituality doesn't work that way. It's not like, how can it apply to this or that? It has to be all. It has to be everything. It has to be that we are willing to live our entire lives a different way. The fact that it then is expressed in work, or it then is expressed in love relationships, or then is expressed in our health or anything, is almost incidental. And so if America is to be a light unto the nations, and at times we have been. I love my country, and I think it's important to love our country, whatever our country. It's important. That's part of your karmic assignment, your incarnational drama. And we are to take responsibility for our ethnicity, we are to take responsibility for our tribe, we are to take responsibility for our sex, our sexuality. Women should care about women's issues. Men should care about things that have to do with men. Blacks should care about black history and what is happening with black justice. Jews should care. Gay people should care. And at the deepest level, the solution lies beyond the body. The solution lies where we realize that we're not even bodies, as the Course in Miracles would teach us. We're not bodies, and these are not discrete events. Until we truly humble ourselves, until we truly commit ourselves as individuals and collectively to living on this planet in a different way, where God is God. Money is not God, God is God, and God is love. And in our own individual lives, that every decision to the best of our ability, and none of us, we're not enlightened masters, but we can support each other in getting there. We can support each other in leaning into the ways of enlightenment. Where am I putting money first, and where am I putting love first? Where am I putting getting what I want from this relationship first? And where am I getting what can I give into this relationship first? Where am I getting trying to make things happen the way I want first? And where am I allowing things to happen the way love would want them to happen first? Where am I putting my energies into making it happen so that I get what I want? And where am I making myself radically available to love's purposes on any given day? Until I make that change all the way, and what I will find in my individual life, what any of us will find in our individual lives, is that the law is, a girlfriend of mine once said to me, and I thought she put it really well, the universe keeps a perfect set of books. It does. America's been warring against everybody and everything for so long, committing so many unbelievably wrong-minded military actions throughout the world, and now we're all shocked that some stuff comes home to us. How dare they? I love it how when things happen, people go, how dare they, how dare they? Do you know how many people around the world say about us, how dare they? And if you don't know, awaken. Because if we do not have a collective awakening of consciousness, this is why we talk all the time about how, no ditziness. This is the time for great maturity. This is the time for real grown-ups. And a spiritual seeker is that. A real spiritual seeker is a spiritual grown-up. And so, that's what it means to put love first. What it means to put love first is to be real. Where we put love first, we got love back.
where we put love second, what we got back was not love. Enough with the fake horror. Now it's time to atone for our own mistakes and ask where we ourselves have limits to love. You know, it seems like, well, I can't take on my whole country. Well, in the voting booth, yes, you can. But for tonight's purposes, what I'm asking that we do, what I think is important for all of us to do, when I read that part in the course where it was talking, I was reading this part the other day, and I felt so busted. It said, you're loving and you're loving and you're loving till someone has the audacity to not be grateful. You're loving and you're loving and you're loving until somebody else doesn't act with this understanding of your loving, and then you go into, I have my limits. And this part in the course was so fascinating because when you read it, it's like, well, of course, everything that doesn't work in my life is that place where I had my limits, where my love was limited. It's not that you're not a good person, Marianne. It's not that you're not a good country, United States. It's not about that. Grow up. You know, that's what I felt reading that. Be honest. Where are your limits? And so, Richard, you're here? Richard is here tonight with us? Richard Lermont is here with us, our wonderful Richard. And I'm asking you to consider, where are your limits? And then look at all the ways, then it becomes easier to see all the ways when we act like politics and economics and spirituality, that they're just different realms. They're not different realms. Anything that any of us do, whether we're doing it individually or collectively, is an expression either of our openness to love or our withhold. And where there is love, there is abundance. Where there is love, things work. If you withhold love from little children, they're not fed, they're not cared for. All the ways in which we withhold, we don't make that our bottom line. Because little children, they don't represent a financial interest. They don't work yet. They don't have any economic leverage. They can't send lobbyists to Congress. And as a consequence, their needs are put lower and lower and lower and lower on the priority list. So the people who can afford the donations and all of that get it. And then these kids, by the time they're 8, this is like, hello, wake up. Because if the light has not claimed, if love has not claimed a child by the time they're 8, what do you expect? What do you expect? And then we go, oh, how did it happen? Really, how did it happen? And so all of us have a part to play. For women particularly, we've only been voting in this country since 1921. It hasn't even been 100 years. And for so long we didn't have power. And so once we got power, even though all the battles have not been won, all the feminist ideals have not been won, I'm not saying they have, but enough have been done that women in America need to change the tenor of the conversation from how do we get more power to what are we going to do with this power now that we have so much of it. And if the women of America said about all of these things, whether it is domestic policies or international policies that hurt children, violate the rights of children, or ignore children, then we are not doing our job. And if you misuse your power, you tend to lose your power. This is time for all of us to stand up for the real power, not just to get what we want, but the power of all of us is not just to be exercised so that we can get what we want. The power of love that we are to glorify is the power that is to move through us to make the world a better place. So this isn't about, it's like a therapy session, not like we're to feel all horrible about where we've gotten it wrong, but it is that we're to bear witness and we're to atone for our errors. And sometimes the pain of knowing where we ourselves have not been who we might have been actually takes us into a deeper place of committing to get things better. So, when we go into this meditative space, it's an amazing thing. Your subconscious has all of the answers, and the Spirit of God will work through your subconscious mind if you allow it to. So, we're going to look, and your mind is more than glad to reveal it to you. We just haven't been asking, where do I have my limits? Where do I withhold my love? Where am I needy? Where am I controlling? Where am I angry? Where am I dishonest? Where am I grandiose? Where do I lack compassion? Where do I lack empathy? Where do I go ditzy? Where do I disconnect? Where do I disengage? And so forth. If we ask, we will be shown. And then it's an amazing thing. The Course in Miracles is not about, well, I have to go through my childhood and figure out how I got that way. I know in my own life, if I look at my darkness, there are two categories, where I can figure out how my childhood got me that way, and where I can not even see the connection between this and my childhood. But this I know. It has never in my life, and I'm not saying the Course in Miracles wouldn't say you never look back. Maybe there's going to be something you were led to. But as a general idea and concept, I know in my life, it's never knowing this is because of mommy or this is because of daddy. It doesn't matter where you got your character defects. What matters is that they're yours now. You don't get rid of them by figuring out how you got them. You get rid of them by surrendering them to God. I am willing not to be this way. I really get that being this way messes things up. It messes things up for me, and it messes things up for other people, but I can see that this is where the wires get crossed, and I get stuck. Dear God, please help me. Does that make sense? And when enough people in the United States are willing to look with open eyes, and you know, the Course in Miracles says God does not give you victory in battle. It lifts you above the battlefield. I have a friend who was saying to me the other day, because she's very right-wing and I'm not, and she's one of my closest girlfriends, and you know, it's very touching actually, some of the emails, and she was talking about Black Lives Matter and police and stuff, but she said, I'm just trying to see the other side. And I wrote her back and said, there really is no other side. There is no other side. Everyone is our fellow citizen. It's when you look at it that way, and these are very difficult times for that. These are not easy times of this is right, this is wrong. You know, I'm Jewish. I feel very strongly pro-Israel, and I know that there are issues there, but nobody on either side of that question has it right if they think this side is all innocent and this side is not. Anybody who's coming from that about Israel is totally imbalanced, because the truth is deeper. And the deeper truth, it's more complicated, and the deeper truth is where none of us are black or white, none of us are Arab or Jew, none of us are Israeli or Palestinian. It's some deeper place. And when we go to that deeper place, that's the Course in Miracles says where we can be miracle workers. So we have to find the limits to our own capacity to love, so that then we can be available to the radical love that will heal all things, not only in our own lives, but in all the world. Does that make sense? Okay, let's pray. As we close our outer eye, we open the inner eye. We dissolve the outer darkness by seeing the light within. And now we ask that the Spirit of God reveal to us our own limits to love. We are willing to see the character defect, the barriers to love, the things we do, the ways we react, the walls we construct that keep love at bay and keep love from moving through us. On this night, we make ourselves radically available. May the Spirit of love now enter into us more deeply, more powerfully than ever before. We humble ourselves before the corrective power and merciful force of love. We place our past in the hands of God that He might change our mind about it for us. For the love we gave was real, the love we received was real, and all else is an illusion. We ask now to be awakened from the illusion, that we ourselves might be conduits of love. Where we have been harsh, dear God, please make us gentle. Where we have been angry, dear God, please make us peaceful. Where we have been dishonest, make us people of our word. Where we have compromised ethically, make us impeccable and true. Where we have been controlling, make of us people, dear God, who can release all people and things to be as they are. Where we have been judgmental, dear God, make us non-judgmental. Where we have tempted to blame others, teach us how to bless them instead. Where we are attached to outer things, dear God, release our attachments that we might know that only love sustains us. Dissolve all hatred within us. May your love dissolve all fear within us. May we go ever deeper beyond the places where we've always stopped, where we have loved until this point, where we have loved except on this issue, where we have loved except where it did not get us what we wanted immediately. We stand before you, dear God, completely naked before you. We release into your hands all that is false, all that is illusion, all that is fear, all that is not love within us. And now, having made ourselves available radically and completely to God's love, we now place ourselves in service to our country and to our world. No matter what country we live in, no matter what country is our country of citizenship, we place it in God's hands and we atone. We atone for the ways that our country in any way has not behaved with love. We atone for any way that our country has put money or anything else before love. We atone for the ways our country has transgressed or perpetrated any lovelessness towards others. We atone for our country for any injustice, any unfairness, any oppression, any violence, any way we have deviated from love. And we know that we are joined by millions of other people who feel as we do and just don't know what to do. There is no more powerful doing and changing one's mind. And we glory in this change of mind as we join with everyone else thinking the same way, atoning for the errors not only of ourselves but of our country and countries, and devoting ourselves to being part of the change, that we might change where we need to change in our own lives, delivered from the ways fear has held us back, and knowing that countries too can change, so that love, not fear, love, not money, love, not materiality, love, not any other goal, shall be the goal of our lives and the goal of our nations and the goal of our species. That the trajectory of history shall change and the human race shall awaken, and tears shall be no more. We know, dear God, that you have a plan. We know that you can only do for us what you can do through us. And so we present ourselves to you on this night. Use us, work through us in whatever way that you direct. May each of us grow strong in our listening to the internal guidance, that we might know how he would use our hands and how he would use our feet, how he would use our minds and how he would use our hearts, how he would use our words and how he would use our actions, that joined with millions and millions of others around the world who wish as we do and pray as we do for the peace that ends all war, and the love that heals all fear, and the health that ends all sickness. This miracle, may it be on earth as it is in heaven. As we now look with the inner eye upon the entire world and we see it blessed, we cast our blessing onto every man, woman, and child, and every animal, and every plant, and all living things. We cast our love upon the waters, and upon the air, and upon the earth. The power of our love now extending from deep within us, blessing the entire universe. And as we do so, the nations themselves shall fall in alignment with the love that rules all things. We rise up now, above and beyond the childish things, the lesser goals, the illusions and the falsehoods that occupied our minds, and pray only that we be of use to love. Whatever vision, whatever guidance you see in your mind at this moment, take it seriously. When the voice of God speaks to you, open your ears and believe it. What you know at this moment, allow yourself to know. Own the power of God within you. And so it is. We all say, Amen.